Good morning, everybody. Thanks so much, Elle. Keeping our local centres thriving, vibrant and economically sustainable is one of the most important challenges facing the planning industry. They are the hearts and hubs of local life, and the planning industry is being forced to find new ways to advance our thinking and approach to planning in these critical local settings. Over the last few years, the changes in our precincts have been really evident with the shift to online retail, and with the unprecedented online global pandemic in early 2020, this only saw this trend accelerate. And whilst we saw our communities turn their sights inwards on their cities and local precincts, we also saw the vacant floor space expanding as demand for online decreased, all of which threatened the life, livelihood and user experience within our local centres. With COVID changing our lives in the way that it did and the way we worked, live and played, it became really clear that retail, hospitality and property and the arts in particular were industries that all were hit really hard and had to adapt the most. And so, as is so often the case with many of our precincts, this is actually the lifeblood of those and the place fabric that creates the vibrancy there. So shining a light on this and shining a light on our precincts and what was happening over the last 12 months. The benefit is that our communities have really embraced the shop local phenomenon and in particular have this fierce support of the grocer next door or local store corner. So how do we as a planning industry empower our local communities to stay the course, stay connected and ensure a long-term proposition to save our centres and keep them humming? The development of the Latrobe and Given Terrace Precinct Strategy and Activation Toolkit was a pilot project really that we undertook to support our local struggling centres. And little did we know that with COVID hitting, this would commence a project that really was a critical space, and take us on a critical journey in this space. The toolkit represents a highly localised planning model for creating brighter futures for our city's local centres. And the pilot was co-designed by a Place Design Group, business, precinct donors and local government with Brisbane Economic Development Agency and Brisbane City Council. It was highly targeted and custom built to identify the precinct's unique makeup, identify its identity and place qualities and its local community users and visitors for greater uplift across the board. Ultimately, the project presented a really fresh place-based approach to help inform, empower and build precinct stakeholder capability across the board. It focused on three core areas that are on screen: brand identification, precinct foundations and tactical tools. Precincts, whether they are city fringe or regionally based, often sit within sort of two categories. They're purpose-built with one or few landowners, or they're a more organic evolution with multi-landowners and business users. Obviously, the benefit of having that purpose-built precinct is that with having very few who are participating in the rollout and delivery of that, it's an easier proposition to create a central vision and brand outcomes in terms of the core characteristics and values and what they want that precinct to be from the outset. This can streamline curation of development, leasing and activation, and has been seen to be extremely successful with the likes of precincts of James Street Precinct in Brisbane, Britomart in Auckland, Barangaroo in Sydney. The toolkit forms this structure, and whilst it can be utilised in this sort of situation to support the development of a precinct, in the case of the Latrobe and Given Terraces project and pilot, we really were utilising it to uncover the natural brand or the true brand value that sat there naturally as part of what was already existing within the precinct. So this was really a process of collaboration with precinct stakeholders and community to consider the natural characteristics and inherent truths of the precinct that made it so unique from any other precinct, whether it was 500 metres down the road or in another state. The brand value wasn't about the bright and shiny logo and marketing tool, which so often is focused on in many cases, and is really the window dressing to a precinct. Rather, it was what sat behind that and what creates the authentic nature of a precinct that can't be replicated. The reason why locals come back and visitors want to explore. It really enables the precinct stakeholders to set a clear vision by knowing what this brand value was and a direction for the precinct as it moved forward. In terms of the second component of the toolkit, which was the development of the precinct foundations, we really wanted to look at the decision-making process of the precinct. When you have so many layers to a precinct in terms of landowners, businesses from small to large scale, community groups, and in many cases intersecting council jurisdictions, how a precinct makes a unified decision is extremely challenging. So central to this was looking at the governance structure. Again, many precincts, organic in nature, are made up of a patchwork structure with very few who take up the interest, time and energy to push a precinct forward, which is fantastic but becomes really unsustainable. Chambers of commerce and trading associations are often a solution in this space, but as precincts become hyper-localised, there is a need to look at these in terms of the challenges that this presents in terms of membership, funding and priorities. How do you achieve that when you're looking at a Chamber of Commerce that often includes many precincts, or a traders association that may only include certain precinct businesses? So the governance structure, again, really need to be considered in terms of its localised and personalised approach, considering existing structures, business networks, in addition to the vision of the precinct in terms of customer profile, like localised versus visitors, and really looking at the backbone of what that governance structure needed to be and then who was going to participate in that. A critical consideration of the Latrobe pilot was the diversity of offering and therefore businesses that really. And a critical part of that was really looking at how could we bring in a impartial party to be part of that governance structure, someone or multiple people that could really have that unbiased view and engagement with not only the precinct stakeholders, but also more broadly with government and funding bodies. So that was a consideration that we worked through on the pilot as well. The foundation tools also looked at the funding and membership, so how precinct stakeholders could actively participate, and not only in the decision making, but also what would the micro and macro level benefits be? How would this be funded, whether it was directly through partnership structures or through grant opportunities? This was really important to set expectations because with so many precincts, they often lean on events and activations to create that funding, long-term funding or local government support, both of which become really project specific and really don't provide that continuity of funding to create that sustainability. So again, a really critical area for this toolkit. The final bit of the precinct foundation was in setting an agreed curatorial charter. So considering the brand values, the vision of the precinct, and looking at the core guidelines that would really lead the decisions across the precinct, whether this be around decision making, policing, how the precinct stakeholders would consider development and infrastructure changes, and what activation could be considered and who they would partner with. So in essence, it was their rule for decision making across the precinct. By establishing the brand identity and precinct foundation, a precinct is really able to analyse what works and what doesn't work. I think when you're in the trenches of your own business, or whether that's from a land ownership perspective or retail, it's really hard to look beyond your own needs. And the precinct strategy was really developed to enable all stakeholders involved to look up and focus on the holistic offering of the precinct. It's only when you do this that you can actually start to identify what you see as challenges that could actually turn into opportunities. And there were two key examples that came out of the Latrobe pilot. The first was looking at the precinct, what they deemed the precinct killer. And this was Suncorp Stadium, one of the main stadiums in Brisbane, which sat on the edge of the precinct. Game days where Suncorp Stadium was filled to the brim were really seen as lost days across the precinct, with localised parking banned and therefore loss of foot traffic and spend across precinct businesses. However, by having a considered framework set, and having that strategy, discussions were able to be entered into with Stadiums Queensland. And what happened is that the precinct saw that there was opportunities in terms of development of membership engagement for the stadium, precinct promotions and economic uplift for precinct businesses, and really a renewed community engagement across that shared customer base. So a really great potential partnership opportunity. The second was driven out of the ever problematic car parking issue that just seems to be the #1 concern across every precinct that we work with. In part, again, because of this Suncorp Stadium discussion, we really were able to articulate the precinct strategy clearly when we started to have further discussions around car parking. And what happened was that the precinct stakeholders were able to discuss with local government about the challenges with this and look at considerations for funding around a precinct-wide shuttle service, which is actually now being piloted. This would reduce the pressure on car parking needs, it would change the way that the partnerships could work, and it really could look at ensuring that the precinct stakeholders could focus on what were the streetscape upgrades, what were the activations and other activities that they could really consider that really focused on that pedestrian focus that was really needed, particularly coming out of COVID. So some really great outcomes with that. The last piece of the toolkit, and what everyone wanted to get their hands on, of course, was the tactical tools and roadmap for precinct stakeholders. As part of the toolkit, we really wanted to provide a suite of locally targeted tools to equip precinct stakeholders to move forward without the need for additional support. This really looked at steps required to set up everything from the governance structure to the membership model, partnership opportunities, as well as early communication with precinct stakeholders. It also provided an outline of quick, light touch interventions and activations that really aligned with the brand value and visions, and which required little in the way of resourcing and cost, two of which are really critical pieces as the precincts move forward. These all were focused on activities that would elevate and align all stakeholders across the precinct and provide benefit at a precinct level rather than individual level to set the tone and really establish that shared outcome. So a really strong piece of the toolkit. While we're now witnessing this precinct stakeholder, all of the precinct stakeholders using this precinct strategy or this blueprint for decision making, what's exciting at a broader level, particularly in the Australian context, is the activity we're seeing across precincts. With COVID, not only did it encourage hyper-local support, it also completely leveled the playing field. Where once precincts, big or small, new or old, had varying degrees of community interest and interaction, what we're seeing is that COVID changed this as community moved their work, life and play to a narrow geographic bubble within the reach of their home. So they really started to focus on all of the precincts that sat within those communities. And this meant that precincts, particularly at a regional and city fringe level, became a core part of our community's daily life more than ever before. Whilst this bubble starts to expand and communities start to venture further afield, we do have this rare window of time where community are still focused on local, and we need to capture this window of community engagement and participation. So what we're really focused on is, the need to work with precinct stakeholders and support them to come together to set the vision and framework for their individual precincts to achieve long-term targets for greater precinct vibrancy, uplift and sustainability, which will have huge benefit to all of our cities and regions as we move forward. Thanks so much for today.